So colleagues, thank you very much. Let's start with thematic session number 2. Just in the interest of time, we do see that our colleagues online have also joined us here today. So this session is about priorities for clean energy investments, talking about energy climate nexus. I wanted to go over a bit to take lead from the concept note as well, but I think just in the interest of time, let's not go that way because we still have a packed agenda till evening. So I am honored that in this session I have with me some very esteemed colleagues in the panel. We have Ms. Kashmala Kakakhel, who's a climate finance expert. Thank you very much for joining us. We have Ms. Sobia Becker, a climate change advisor at FCDO. Thank you, ma'am, for joining us. We have Ms. Warda Malik, investment advisor, Seed Pakistan. Mr. Umar Malik, CEO, Shams Power Private Limited. Dr. Fayaz Chaudhry Saab, who's professor at Energy Institute, LUMS. Dr. Fayaz Saab, Dr. Umar, Mr. Umar, and Ms. Warda are joining online. I'm told that we will be having a recorded message from a board of investment here as well, which probably we can take at the very end. Let me bring in the first esteemed panelist here for her interventions and start with our climate finance expert first. So Ms. Kashmala Kakakhel, and to also do justice with her profile, she has over 14 years of experience of working with governments and development partners in various countries, and I think this cross-country experience is something which all of us need so much to learn from the peers, to learn from the region, and how can sort of we craft our own way forward in this area. So I do have a very specific question here as well for you, but we'll take it as a follow-up. But let's open with your broad perspectives on the theme of this session 2, please.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone, and I'd like to thank STPI for inviting me to this very interesting conversation, exactly the direction we should be taking going forward, the sort of debate we should be engaging in, given that this is energy, we all know, is a key enabler of economic development, of overall growth. So we see it as a one of the most important critical element which actually underpins all critical global objectives, whether it's employment, whether it's food security. We want to talk about urbanization. What you actually see is that energy underpins all your development and growth agenda overall. Which is why we then saw globally, when there was discussion on how to move forward on 2 very particular areas. One, the SDGs. Is this better? Okay, thank you. When we spoke about the SDGs, we were talking about bringing a global agreement on the SDGs. We spoke about bringing a global agreement on climate change. And between the two, we see the golden thread actually being the issue of energy, which actually brings both these conversations together, given that it underpins primarily your overall objectives. And we all know SDG 7, which talks to energy. We know it talks about 3 specific targets, which is energy for all. It talks about increasing renewable energy mix as much as possible. But the one we all generally all miss is the one that talks about energy efficiency. The one that talks about doubling energy efficiency by 2030, a key area that we all ultimately sort of forget in the larger scheme of things. When we look at the financial flows that have happened from developed countries to developing countries when it comes to financial support for energy support, it's to the tune of $17 billion. It increased from about 10 billion in 2010 to about 17 billion in 2017. And the way things are going, it looks to be reaching about $20 billion annually. But again, you see that the lion's share is actually going to renewable energy, which is fine. Within that, we're also looking at the hydro energy, which is also fine. But equally important, as I said, is the one target that we keep missing is the one on energy efficiency, because that, as I will illustrate with some examples and numbers, becomes an equally important player in helping us address our energy challenges when we go forward. Primarily, why has this not been looked at as an important area or an area that we should be investing in? For obvious challenges that we've always seen. And now I'm coming down to Pakistan. So specifically in Pakistan, why is it that we haven't really looked at or explored how we can address the issue of or actually benefit from the energy efficiency sphere? Obvious reasons, we've had an absence of regulatory framework. There's no formal education in this area. There are no financial or non-financial incentives. Then, of course, there's inadequate standards, labeling regime. There's no monitoring and evaluation in the system, which is why nobody has really been interested in actually going towards this direction. But if you actually think about it, you realize that it has a twin benefit. When I say twin benefit, what do I mean? There have been studies, there is research, there is documentation which shows that if Pakistan actually starts tapping into its energy efficiency potential, two things will happen. Right now, Pakistan's energy consumption is about 90 million ton oil equivalent. If we start moving towards or start using energy efficiency practices, we can reduce that consumption about 10 to 12 million MTOs. MTOE, sorry. And that is about 10 to 15% of your current energy consumption. Automatically, you're reducing your dollar bill in terms of your imports. The other twin that I was talking about is the reduction in your GHG emissions. If you look at the overall GHG emission, which is from the energy sector, as our NDC quotes, is about 185 million tons of CO2 emitted. If you actually invest in energy efficiency, you will be able to reduce, there is a capacity to reduce, again, about 10 to 12 million 10 to 12 million, as I explained earlier, of the MTOE, which has the benefit of reducing about 25 million GHG emissions. And as I said, the total GHG emissions is about 185 million from the energy in itself only, and that you can reduce to about 14% automatically. So the twin, you can already see about 10 to 15% reduction in your overall energy bill, and the about 14% reduction in your overall GHG emissions. Now, that's fine. That's really good. That sounds good. All the numbers are good. But where exactly are we in Pakistan when we talk about energy efficiency? So some stuff has happened and more needs to happen. When I say stuff has happened, let's talk about the regulatory framework. So we have the NECA, the National Energy Efficiency and Conservation Authority. An act was passed in 2016, which actually gave it the overall regulatory framework that the energy efficiency process actually requires. Within that now, 2020, I'm speaking to 2020, where they've produced a strategic action plan for 2020-2023, and they've divided it into three specific areas in which they're going to move forward in the next 3 years. One is, of course, the institutional part of it, where they need to fix their policies, their provincial action plans, their tribunals, basically setting the regulatory framework under which then the actual operation will begin. Operation primarily means setting standards. It looks at labeling, it looks at monitoring, enforcing, it looks at certification. So basically setting that operational piece. And then the third is the actual implementation, where they've identified 5 specific sectors which will actually help reduce of the 12 million that I spoke to earlier, Pakistan has set a target to reduce about 3 million of that, 3 million MTOs. So the target is set, the framework is also set, and the budget has also been allocated. They're looking at this costing this entire, the process, the institutionalization, the operationalization, and then the implementation is to the tune of about 17 billion rupees. That's about $107 million. Most of this is around facilitation, about setting standards, about forcing or supporting the private sector to move towards energy efficient means. So the plan is in place. It has been budgeted. There's a way forward, but of course, this requires a lot of effort in terms of everyone coming together, because it's primarily going to be from an individual level to the light bulb and the fans that we use at home, to all the way to the sugar industry or the textile industry, where the machines need to be made more energy efficient. So it's while the government is providing the regulatory framework as well as the institutional and the operational backstopping, the actual element will come in once, of course, the enforcements are put in place, so that the community overall starts moving in that direction. I'll stop here. I know I've taken longer maybe than I should have, but just to sort of set the tone on a slightly different tangent altogether. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. I think you have set the tone for the session, and thank you for taking us through the dividends here from energy efficiency, GHG emissions, and you quantified some of the gains for us, and including explaining the roles of the various bodies, including NECA. I think this sets the tone for this session. Let me now invite Ms. Sobia, and just for a formal introduction, she's climate change advisor at FCDO, a climate change specialist, and expertise lie in areas of climate, energy, and sustainable development, in creating partnerships and platforms for action. She has led initiatives in climate risk management and continues to work with public and private sectors in developing cohesive frameworks for climate action. So, I'm tempted to begin, or at least pose the question, a very broad question on development partners' perspective in general on the subject. But of course, given that you bring in such a cross-sectoral experience over here, I would also invite you to shed some highlight on these cross-sectoral issues, particularly with regards to the energy, water, transport nexus, for example, and related aspects. So it's over to you, please.
Thank you. And Assalamu alaikum, everyone. And I'd also like to start with, first of all, at the risk of sounding like I'm winning an Oscar or something, begin with thanking STPI, you, Sajid Amin, and Aslam, Abdullah, Khalid, and Mujib for all the coordination and hard work that they've been doing. Thanks very much for the very warm welcome and introduction. And this is such a relevant topic. And the energy transition is also one of the UK's key COP campaigns. Not just a COP campaign, but it's a development priority issue, and it will be for quite some time. Because you see, the current temperature of the planet is about 1.25 degrees centigrade right now. So we don't have a lot of room to delay climate action. We need to address this now, and we need to address this very concretely, because climate change is a tragedy of the commons. You know, there are no losers here. There are no winners here, sorry. We're all going to be losers if this doesn't go through. We also know that decarbonizing the energy sector is a critical action, because most of the global carbon budget that speaks to the temperature increase scenarios that the Paris Agreement has is linked very directly to the emissions from the energy sector. And this is globally. So this is something that we need to take care of. So as a global community, we're not only in a race to net zero, a race to zero, we're also in a race to zero deaths, because if the COVID pandemic has shown us anything, it's that we need to take care of nature and make sure that development is sits comfortably with nature and not at the cost of nature and climate. And then there are a number of actions that also need to be taken. We've seen that in COVID, when most economic activity was grinding slowly to a halt, investments in new and renewable energy technologies were increasing at a rate of 2 to 1 as compared to fossil fuel and coal investments. So for every dollar invested in creating green jobs, renewable energy related jobs, you had 14 additional jobs than you would have in traditional energy investments. So when you look at the cost benefit of coal and fossil fuels versus new renewable energies or alternate renewable energies, and especially when you factor in the negative externalities that are associated with coal and fossil fuels, then investments in renewable energy are always going to make more business sense. So we are talking here about, well, the broader issue that we're discussing is financing the transition, but your question to me specifically, Vakar, was how are development partners thinking about the energy transition? And as you can see, there's a tremendous push towards phasing out coal and transitioning to sustainable, clean energy and growth trajectories. The G7 announcement recently was very heartening. The stance of the multilateral development banks on no new investments in coal or fossil fuel related infrastructure is extremely heartening. And you can see that a lot of these for want of a better word, a lot of the Pakistan's partner development countries are leading the way by demonstrating that they're walking the talk. So it's not just about the talk, but they're putting their money where their mouths are. Although we haven't specifically gotten to that question, but I would like to add here that I don't think that financing the energy transition is an issue. I think the key issue is political will. The second issue is awareness. And the third issue is crowding in traditional sources of finance as well as non-traditional sources of finance. So with political will, with Prime Minister Imran Khan's statement at the Climate Ambition Summit in December of last year, Pakistan again demonstrated its climate leadership by saying that there will be no more investments in imported coal. And there's also the very strong policy statement of increasing the share of renewables in the energy mix by 60% by 2030, which is again, very, very heartening news. The development partners and, or let me just back up and say that the UK, as one of Pakistan's development partners, is firmly committed to supporting this energy transition in Pakistan. We have something called the UK COP26 Energy Transition Council, which has been established specifically to help countries like Pakistan accelerate the transition to away from fossil fuels and coal, well, away from coal. This Energy Transition Council also has a rapid response facility, which locks in the technical assistance and resources that Pakistan might need to transition away from coal. And this is support that can be delivered rapidly via a platform, a network of development partners. And this is also a segue to project financing and assistance that will come later. So like I was saying, financing the energy transition is not the issue. It's getting your plan of action, developing a strategic way forward, and then it's about getting access to finance. And I'd just like to take a moment and Kashmala, I enjoyed your comments very much because from 2006 to 2010, I was working with industry, with textile industry on the rational use of energy. And energy efficiency at that time was something before its time. But I'm very glad that Nika is now getting the recognition that it does deserve because energy efficiency is a low-hanging fruit. It is it's much easier, obviously, to save 1 megawatt of energy than it is to produce that megawatt of energy. So this is something that all of us should be doing. And then supplementing those actions with renewable energy, developing renewable energy options, and those go hand in hand. So these things are very important. Thank you.
Thank you indeed. I think this was a very comprehensive overview of not just the intent of the development partners, but also I think you laid out a plan of action very clearly, informing us that it's not the financing which is often felt or assumed as a constraint. It's also about political will. It's also about having a good connection between plans and budgets, and having those strategic plans going forward with strong implementation framework. So thank you very much. And let me now quickly move to our next very esteemed panelist, Ms. Varda Malik. Ms. Varda Malik is investment advisor in a seed program. She has over 15 years of diverse professional experience in investment strategy, policy and development finance. She has worked across a wide range of public and private sector initiatives, including investment in climate reforms, public-private partnerships, education, and public investment management. She's been part of the World Bank, IFC, and brings a lot of experience to the table. And I thought that we should utilize Varda Sahiba's time over here, and we do have questions which I think she's joining us online, and we do have questions for her. But I think it'll also be interesting, Varda Sahiba, if you inform us about a seed as well, and how the priorities in the seed program connect with our theme, which we are discussing here today. And then maybe if we can invite your comments on how could we incorporate climate change policy coherence across different other policies, including industrial or SME or other policies, you know, because that policy coherence is a huge, at times becomes elephant in the room here. So it's over to you, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Waqar, and to SDPI for arranging this summit. It's around a very important issue of clean energy transition in Pakistan. I'm really grateful to be sharing this space with your esteemed panel. So about seed, a little bit about seed. I'm the investment advisor on the program. SEED is Sustainable Energy and Economic Development Program, and it's a UK FCDO funded technical assistance program specific for the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province. Overall, what we're trying to do is to aim to help the province plan and finance investments it needs for growth, jobs, and prosperity by increasing and improving not only public but private investments also in the province. Not only that, we're very, very focused on making these investments generate higher economic, social, and environmental results. A key focus among other areas that we're working on is to mobilize investments in priority sectors, and energy has been the focus since inception last year in March. In the space of energy, we have successfully delivered a funding strategy and a portfolio that we will be working on for Pakhtunkhwa Energy Development Organization. And we have a pipeline of $130 million projects in project finance and corporate finance for PIDO. The aim is really to realize the potential of GOKP, Government of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, using the hydropower assets it has, and in doing so contribute towards improving the energy mix in the country as well, since all of these projects in PIDO is basically hydropower. Apart from that, we're also supporting wheeling transaction, which is geared towards utilizing provinces' energy resources, hydropower, in an environmentally sustainable and economic way. There has been discord resistance, but hopefully there will be a resolution soon. The aim for wheeling transaction for seed is basically to make electricity at affordable rates, and while doing so, boost economic activity by industrial bulk power purchasers. We're also looking at to initiate technical assistance to the government to solarize selected public sector buildings through solarization. And the model we're looking at is the ESCO model. And we're really excited about that. And there's a huge potential, as we've heard from various panelists during this summit. Part of the FCDO funded programs, so we also have to commit ourselves to meet certain indicators under the UK International Climate Finance, and Sobia is there. So, you know, she's aware that, you know, all programs have to commit to a certain ICF indicators. What we are reporting on is the volume of private investment mobilized for climate change purposes, the level of integration of climate change in the national planning processes. And so we are KP specific, so we are working very closely with the government on that. We have developed ESMS guidelines to strengthen P&D capacity for appraisal and public investment management. And we are also going to be reporting on the level of institutional knowledge for climate change issues. So this is in a nutshell of what SEED is doing. In terms of policy coherence for climate change, I think the emerging policy suggestions that come to my mind are that the governments and federal, provincial alike, basically the coherence that has to be vertical and as well as horizontal. The climate change policy coherence is about coherence between climate change adoption and mitigation within and across policy domains. I believe most relevant to the topic at hand is whether the Pakistan's national and provincial water, agriculture, energy, the food insecurity, this nexus, and the sector policies, development plans, strategies are aligned in a climate change policy in a very coherent manner. We need to take cross-sectoral approach. And in terms of, if I talk about energy alone, we have talked a lot during the summit about the various policy frameworks that have come out in the last few years. NICA, we just, Kashmala mentioned about the NICA in 2016. There's been an ARE policy in 2019, the IGCEP, and the National Energy Policy now also. We need to see that these policies within the sector, so we not only that we're talking about horizontally, that, you know, within sectoral domains, the CC policy is coherent, but also within the sector, I've just mentioned a couple. Within the sector, these sectoral policies and action plans have to be coherent with each other. I also know that ARE is defined differently in various policy frameworks in Pakistan. And so I think we need to make sure that these are aligned. I think water is not part of ARE, but it is on national energy policy. So, I mean, these are the few things that we need to be cognizant of. I'm not a public policy expert, but these are my few thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Varda Malik, and thank you for highlighting, explaining to us the focus of SEED, but also, of course, highlighting the challenges around coherence. And I think you rightly pointed out that it's not only that coherence is required horizontally, but also within, of course, sectors as well. And it, of course, sometimes becomes a challenge when, of course, you have frameworks to deal with at federal and then at subnational level as well. But I think this is where we need to bring or shed light upon and ensure that, of course, things dovetail in a manner that there is seamless implementation of whatever policies and plans are there. As you rightly talked about water not being part of ARE, and thank you for highlighting that aspect as well. Now let me now move to our next speaker, also joining online, Mr. Umar Malik Saab. He is a CEO of Shams Power Private Limited. Shams Power is a leading distributed solar generation company of Pakistan, offering long-term power purchase agreements for commercial and industrial customers of Pakistan. Umar Saab himself has 20 years of management experience in energy sector. He has been involved in new business origination, financing, contracts, negotiation and execution, and management of renewable and conventional energy projects. Umar Saab, it's a pleasure to have you with us here today. Let me pose for you. Of course, you are open to of course, highlight your overall inputs on the session's theme. But my specific question for you, given that you're coming from the private sector, you have an eye on future innovations. So what are those emerging new technologies that you are seeing in the next 5 to 10 years, which may be game changers for meeting energy access and climate change goals in Pakistan? Over to you, Umar Saab.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak here today. I think the topic that you've given me, there can be many potential areas that one can speak about, but because I focus specifically on some of these technologies, so I'll speak about how they can make an impact. So in terms of how energy access has changed over the last 10 years globally, and specifically in Pakistan over, I think, the last 2-3 years, is how solar has first met and then beat grid parity in many circumstances. And that has made solar now the choice for any commercial, industrial, or residential consumer when it comes to whatever they have in terms of space availability. So about 5 years ago, jab bijli was at maybe, let's say, 15-14 rupees, solar was still like, a 17, 18, 20 rupee electricity option, and you wouldn't see really any uptake taking place. A couple of events happened, simultaneously. Solar prices started to improve. The State Bank of Pakistan came up with a wonderful green energy financing scheme for both commercial, industrial, and mostly industrial and residential customers, which provided concessional debt for green energy finance. And similarly, companies started to focus in Pakistan to provide this technology. And we first met the grid rates, and now we're able to beat the grid rates by 10, 15, 20, 30, 40%, depending on what the competing rate is. I mean, industrial or residential ke case mein tariffs are lower, but with commercial tariffs, they're much higher. So I think game changer is a pretty broad word, but if I can just tell you, one of the simplest things that stares us in the face could really be the game changer. So solar for us, I feel, in Pakistan, where each kilowatt that you install will give you anywhere from 3.5 to 4.5 kilowatt hours per day. With this level of solar irradiation, solar is the game changer for Pakistan. I feel that more than the technology, the game-changing element has to come in who finances solar. So I believe very firmly that it should not be the government. It should be individual consumers or private sector players who want to facilitate this development of an alternative power source. So customers, of course, and residential and industrial customers buy solar power themselves as well. They can install solar panels. The State Bank has a wonderful, like I said, financing scheme. Or companies like mine go ahead and finance this for them. So people who don't want to use their own balance sheet, we provide them an off-balance sheet solution to finance the solar transactions. So what happens is essentially that their electricity cost goes down immediately by 20-30%. but they make no investment for it. So it's a technical financing solution, which is providing this game-changing opportunity. And what the limitation we face right now is space. So just to give you some numbers, if we have a factory who has a captive power requirement of 15 megawatts, the factory runs 24 hours, the factory then needs 360 megawatt hours of power every day in 24 hours. But they only have 100,000 square foot of rooftop space, so we can only fit in 1 megawatt of solar. And best case scenario, that 1 megawatt will give them 4 megawatt hours. So their demand is 360 megawatt hours, and they're getting only 4 megawatt hours from solar. So there's still 356 that they have to get from some other source. What is important is for Pakistan as a country to move towards providing an open access opportunity, जिसको हम पाकिस्तान में wheeling policy बोलते हैं, is to finalize the wheeling policy so that private producers can produce cheap solar power and sell it to private consumers without burdening the government with sovereign guarantees, with guaranteed returns on equity, or providing these kinds of capacity payment traps that we keep ending up in, because somehow we always set up more than you need. Then, you know, there's always a demand supply gap. When you fill it up, you actually oversupply, and then you have this capacity payment issue. Then for many years, nothing happens. Demand creeps up and goes above supply. So make it cleaner. I mean, make it private sector focused so that private companies can get into this and take the economic and financial risk around it. There is one other technology that I'd like to just bring up today. Where solar was, 3-4 years ago, battery storage is there today. And battery storage ke upar aaj bhi, if we were to provide electricity using batteries, it would cost us about 30 rupees a kilowatt hour. So which is not viable. I mean, you can't replace the grid with battery because it's not that viable. But with the increase in battery solutions, with battery manufacturing capacity increasing, it's only a matter of time, inshallah, in 2-3 years, this will also meet grid parity. And that is the real game changer, that if you can actually produce power and store it, then you can have truly sites going off grid. I'll pause there, and if there are any questions, I'll remain available. But those are the areas that I felt were truly the game-changing opportunities for us to tap into. Nothing rocket science.
Thank you, Umar Saab. I really appreciate your inputs over here. And I'll take lead from your last words that most of it is not rocket science, and these solutions, these innovations are in front of us. And perhaps now it's more about getting things going. And you also, of course, offered proposals which can rid us of the issue which we continue to talk about, including the capacity power payments, as well as, of course, the innovations around battery solutions, which you mentioned. So thank you very much. And I think continuing with what you have said, or taking lead from what you have said, I think Dr. Faiz Ahmed Chaudhry Saab is here with us. And given that academia is playing such a central role now in operationalizing some of the innovations which you have touched upon or highlighted. So let me now invite Dr. Faiz Chaudhry Saab, who's Professor of Energy Institute in LUMS. Dr. Saab is an electrical engineer with over 34 years of experience in senior management roles, power system planning, secure power system operations. It's an honor to have you, Dr. Saab, and let me, of course, invite your overall comments on the priorities for clean energy investments, energy climate nexus, but also ask you to actually go a step further and inform us what is happening in this field at the level of local academia, and what role can academia play in shaping the policy discussion on energy climate nexus in Pakistan. Dr. Saab, it's over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Waqar. I really appreciate the effort SDPI is putting up. So I listened to quite a few, learned speakers, and everyone has contributed to, what they actually know about their field, and collectively, so the overall we can say, the what image is building up, that hopefully we will converge in our thoughts, because concerns are genuine, as far as energy transition is concerned. But let me, step back where academia can help out and contribute and work hand in hand with the government entities as well as other, policy development institute like yours. What we need to do collectively, I say it 3 times, establish supremacy of the planning process. That is number 1 thing. So as our grid code says, we need to plan our system on a least cost principles. Now, what are those least cost principles? For that to plan, we cannot do any biasing of any input. So it means our inputs have to be independent as far as either technology is concerned or location is concerned. So, keeping in view the least cost principles, but we have to develop our plan based on security needs of the country, making sure that it is sustainable, affordable, and reliable. So these are the basic principles that we have to follow and help as into togetherness. How can we establish the supremacy of the planning process? That is number 1 thing. So number 2 is we need to improve our decision-making process through, again, evidence-based planning and policy making. The investment decision that we make or we plan to make, they have to go through complete overhaul discussions and analysis and modeling. So do we have those people in place with our regulator, with our system planner? So I doubt it, because this is the 3rd time that we have developed the IGCEP. Last year, when we developed the IGCEP, means NTDC plan, it had no hydro. This year we developed our IGCEP, it is 100% hydro. So it means what has changed over 1 year? So it means our inputs to our model are secured. So they cannot be secured. So for that, we need to join hands together. SDPI, Lumps Energy Institute, we can prepare an independent IGCEP, I would say, which is not biased through any technology, either hydro or renewable energy. So what it takes to serve this nation at least cost principles. And if we cannot follow those principles, so we need to identify, if I'm making some project, a committed project, what it will do. So will it increase the cost? Will it decrease the cost? So that process has to be independent. Now, the number 3 things, since we do not know, I would say, how to do the job, otherwise we would have been, if we would have been very good in doing this job, just my, Umar Malik Sahab has mentioned, तो हम कभी ऊपर चले जाते हैं, कभी नीचे आ जाते हैं. So our demand supply, so it means we do not know what we are doing, or if we know what we are doing, we are not doing it rightly, and our decisions are biased. So we need to build that capacity in our institutions so that they do their job properly. Otherwise, the better structure would be that instead of one government entity doing, and then this is the 4th year and inviting lot many criticism, let's do it, that process independent of the government or any influence, I would say. So these are the overall thoughts, because our decision making is flawed. So we need to correct that. And I'll be open to all questions. But this is my main message, that we need to make either we do clean energy transition or whatever we do. The thing is, our decision making has to be unbiased. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Saab. I think you very correctly started off by sensitizing us on the importance of the planning process over here. And then, of course, sticking to the plans that we make for ourselves and using least cost principles in delivering those plans. And you also highlighted the need for modeling capabilities at our regulatory institutions so that more integrated and more, of course, policy relevant modeling efforts can be carried out. So thank you indeed. So given that I have this great, I think, panel which has really stuck to time, and they've been very disciplined, which actually means that I can now invite them for some further deliberations in the little time which we are left with. So one of the things which we are hearing here, and maybe I can start with the two esteemed panelists whom we have here in person, but of course our colleagues who are online, they're welcome to join in. So we are hearing the words that efforts should be private sector led. We are hearing the words that yes, innovations are around, and of course there may be financing solutions as well. Uptake of the innovation, of course, needs to be ensured going forward. But my question to perhaps all of you would be that do our financial institutions in the country really understand the financial viability of these innovations which we want to pursue in the next 5 to 10 years? Would they be willing to take risk on these innovations? Or we would end up going back to the multilateral institutions and knocking on their doors for testing out our own home-driven ideas or creativity. So maybe I can start with this rule first, and we have, of course, Ms. Sovia, Ms. Kashmala, if any one of you would like to start.
Thank you very much, Dr. Vakar. So just a bunch of scattered thoughts on this one. There's always a cost benefit associated with spending today and reaping benefits tomorrow. And I think that requires a behavioral change more than anything else. Us as consumers, yes, I heard us all talk about how we should allow the private sector to take the lead, but we also know, yes, there are certain circumstances which will allow the private sector to take the lead. At the same time, we all understand that the private sector when there is an opportunity in terms of where there is profit involved or where there is an opportunity involved, the private sector and people will go there automatically. It's just a very clear-cut solution. But clearly, we haven't been able to reach that point for either regulation or not the right policies in place or whatever the reason is. So clearly, it's not just fact that the private sector can take on the lead on this one in isolation, because you need to give them the right framework, which we all spoke about some of the policies and frameworks that have been in place, but of course more is required. So in order to make it lucrative, you will have to allow certain space within the government or within the governance structure where you allow the private sector to play its role, right? Now, the second question is, how does the government do that? Right? Yes, policy is fine, all of that is good, but incentive is also important. That's where you mentioned international going back and sort of knocking on their doors. But at the same time, when we look at the energy in the context of climate change, we're talking about a slightly different dimension over here, because then we're talking about finances which developed countries are supposed to work closely with developing countries on, and to help them increase their capacity to deal with climate change. So in that perspective, when we talk about how the government can tap into resources on alternate resources of financing, what Pakistan does is, what we've continuously been doing as developing countries, is going back to very conventional ways of funding these projects. Either it comes from our own pockets, or we go to the standard World Bank, ADB, and others to support us in moving, because this has finance is all moving towards climate finance, because internationally there is recession, there is the money space for development issues to developing countries is shrinking. It's primarily going to be shifting toward, or it already is, moving towards climate finance. So it's really about how you use the resources that are available internationally when you talk about climate change, how you shape that into support that the government provides space in supporting it to create the right regulatory framework, because that also costs. I just mentioned $100 million is what the government needs to just set the regulatory framework for energy efficiency. And then, of course, it's the private sector which will further add investments into this. So it's a step approach wherein everybody needs to play their own role to ensure that we don't go back looking for money in the obvious places that we always do. I'd stop at that and pass on to Sobia.
Thanks so much. And I was nodding my head so vigorously, I thought it was going to fall off. First, to respond to Dr. Chaudhary, the IGCEP is a living document. It's going to be updated every year to reflect the current reality of the country's, the energy sector, energy needs, and the economic situation, because there's a strong economic aspect to that. But moving on from that, your question was, should this be, should this be private sector led? The esteemed colleague said it should firmly be in the private sector. It can't be that, because provision of energy, like the provision of water, like other public services, is a public good. And only the government can ensure that these public goods are provided to all segments of Pakistani society. But what can be done is for the private sector to be co-opted as a partner in development. And here I would link back to what our colleague from Shams Power was saying, and Mr. Malik made a powerful statement that you need to give the private sector room to grow and to flourish. So having clarified that, the next question was of financing. And there are different aspects to financing as well. So if we think back to the example that we started with, energy efficiency, when you subsidize the tariffs, for example, of textile industries, the energy tariffs, and you're giving them subsidies, actually you're rewarding their inefficiency. So that has to stop, because instead of retrofitting their equipment, instead of upgrading, instead of being conscious not just of their energy intensity, but also of their carbon intensity, they are as inefficient as possible, and yet they get subsidies which are a further drain on an overly burdened public system, the energy system as well as the financial system. So let's talk about smart subsidies, and let's talk about redirecting those subsidies, which will encourage more innovation and more efficiency. Then we come to access to credit, which is the flip side of the financing coin. And we heard earlier from our colleague Zarek Khan about the many different interventions that the State Bank has ongoing, and these can only be encouraged. We also have to remember that there's a learning curve, and we're on that. We're at a very nascent stage. So we're still trying to understand how we're going to leverage that and how we're going to employ these different tools that are there. Because I can tell you that in the international climate policy architecture, and as the private sector takes on a stronger role of a partner of development, then these things are going to matter. So you're going to have to report on the TCFD. Soon you're going to have to report on the TNFCD. So there are so many things coming up. But the good news is that we are already taking steps in this country to put Pakistan on a secure footing. Any new technology has a certain period where it needs to mature. You will always have individuals who have the foresight to the early adopters of technology, who then have the first mover advantage. But those are very few, and they can't make up the critical mass needed to make any new innovation successful. And there the government also has a role to play in being that incubator, in encouraging innovation and making sure innovation can take hold. So this is very critical. There were also a couple of other points, like, for example, battery storage. That's a very critical issue, and not just for captive power generation, but also in terms of managing base loads for grids and so. So these are technologies that need to be encouraged and promoted, and we need to look at the system of incentives as well as the disincentives that we have in place. My colleague from SEED made a very powerful comment on climate governance, and this is something that is very important and something that also links in here directly. Because you can have subsidies for one sector, which is actually a disincentive for another sector. And case in point being agricultural mechanization and the climate policy. They do not see eye to eye on that. So these are things that need to be addressed. Thank you.
And maybe very quickly, if colleagues who are online, if they would like to add something here on this question, or of course respond to any other things which the panelists may have said.
Dr. Vakar, I would just like to say a couple of words on this. It's a very interesting conversation, very close to my heart. So, we all know there's no dearth of sources that can be tapped to finance green initiatives and clean energy. Globally, there's so many funds. The growing pool of large bilateral, multilateral financial institutions with deep specialization in green finance. So we have like infrastructure specific, transportation specific, mitigation specific, adaptation specific, global green funds, multilateral green funds, private green investors around there. What we need to really stress is what is the government's role in leveraging and de-risking the project, with new technology, innovations. There's always a risk attached to it. Longer gestation periods, it's higher in cost initially. What is the government doing to de-risk such projects? What is it giving to the investors to come in and lure them? Like a colleague also said on the panel that, you need to lure up the investors for solar, wind. What exactly is happening? The mere few incentives probably will not give incentives in terms of subsidies, tax. I don't think that's going to have a really big dent on it. I think what needs to happen is basically credit enhancement facilities, guarantees, innovation in financial mechanisms that the government needs to offer come into play. Don't leave the private sector decide on their own what they want to do. They're roaming around like headless chicken because the policies are changing every year. The government has to play its role, even for the private sector investment to come in. I cannot overstate this, more. Thank you.
Very important point. Thank you indeed, Ms. Warda Malik. And I think you're absolutely right that system of incentives via tax and subsidies framework has been long tested, and it's time to really look into improving the credit as well as the guarantees regime, and of course areas which Zarak had rightly pointed out earlier as well, which fall under central banks framework, and how they can deliver future investments. If any other panelists would like to contribute, otherwise we have some time for Q&A. Okay, so I have colleagues over here as well, in case Dr. Imran or Dr. Sajid, Dr. Hina, you would like to add anything? Sorry? Oh, someone's, whose hand is raised? Ji, so. आपके पास है facility? जी, allow him in. जी, please. Right. So it's, yes. Now I think I can see you. Ji Tanveer Saab, please go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. I am listening to the whole seminar since morning, and it's really been a great opportunity for everyone to share the thoughts. And I think it's been a very, very healthy discussion. The only one thing which is lacking in all of this discussion, this is purely my individual point of view, that we are really not concentrating on the real ground realities with reference to the RE projects. Since I am into this sector since quite long, and I'm also working in one of the wind power project, what I thought is that why still we are doing a lot of good things in the RE projects, solar, wind, everything, but why still we are able to do only 2000 megawatt? There must be some reasons behind that. The basic reason is that at the moment, whatever we are doing, we need a lot of due deliberations between the various government departments. For example, what? If we are looking at the grid code of Pakistan, the renewable energy projects are must run, but they are, whenever there is any curtailment, it is on the renewable energy projects, the wind projects. But the other projects are still running. Why? Because we have to see that what are the framework of the agreements we have with the other projects. What are the frameworks of projects we have with the renewable energy? So, which means that we have to amend the grid code, as Dr. Irfan have said very rightly. We have to improve the commercial grid code as well. Also, there are companies who are not able to get the payments, the circular debt is increasing. Why? This means that the distribution companies and the network has to be increased, and we have discussed it a lot. But on the other hand, the important thing is, if we really look into any disco, the HR as well as the tech department of the discos have to be improved a lot, so that they should understand. NTDC, WAPDA, and there is another department called National Power Control Center, NPCC. All these things have upgraded. In subco upgrade, we have to upgrade all these things with reference to the technical, as well as with reference to all the other coordinations. So in my opinion, these are some of the very important points. In order to have the renewable projects on ground, we have to do that. For example, why I'm saying like this? Because do we really need the power? The NTDC figure shows that at the moment we are able to produce 35,000 megawatt. Our peak demand is around 20 or 21. the lowest we are going at 8,000. So this is a big gap between the product and the consumption. So we have to improve that.
Right. Ji Tanveer Saab, thank you indeed, Ji. Very pertinent points, and I think we have. Ji, Dr. Saab, आप कुछ ऐड करना चाह रहे हैं, please.
Yeah, I would like to respond to Tanveer Saab's observations. That's the reason I said, because we have sabotaged our planning process. The reasons that he is mentioning, that we have not been properly planning, that's why these things are there. Now, giving a perspective of just, but one observation that he just mentioned, that maybe discos are the only where improvements are needed, for especially making these recoveries that we expect from them. But one has to realize that in 4 years ago, we supplied almost the same energy and we paid 414 billion capacity payments in 1 year for the same amount of energy. So this year we are paying almost 1 trillion, means 957 something billion rupees for the same amount of energy. So this 550 to 600 billion capacity payment that we are paying for the amount of same energy. So that is where we need to concentrate when we talk about the ground realities. So
Agreed.
Our load has to increase, and before putting up new generation, let's concentrate on increasing the load and increasing the industry. In 80s, this was in more 40% industrial contribution. Now it is in early 20s. So this is not sustainable. So what we need to do, increase our load and facilitate our investments, in the industry, as opposed to putting, more emphasis on generation and capacity building. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Saab, for that response. I have 3 things here. I think there are some questions which are appearing on Twitter, and I think those have been highlighted by our team. I'll be happy to pose to the panel in case we have time. The second thing is, of course, that we have distinguished remarks from Ambassador Shafkat Kakakhel Saab. We'll come to that as well. And we also have a summary from the day which we want to highlight. But before that, I think on the clean energy investment aspect, BOIT, Board of Investment and Trade, Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, also has sent their very brief views. I think Hassan Daud Saab had to move into another meeting, but he has just left maybe a 2 minutes video, 2 to 3 minutes video to be played, just so that his views are registered for this panel. Play kar sakte hain?
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm extremely delighted to participate in today's roundtable discussion. And today we are discussing a topic which talks about the future generation, climate change, and energy growth for the country. So with that said, first of all, let me congratulate Dr. Abid Suleri, Dr. Waqar, Dr. Abdullah, and all the management and board of governors of SDBI to always be a stimulus of healthy discussion and debate which contributes towards policy making and decision making which we need for development of this country. Ladies and gentlemen, as a former project director CPEC and now CEO of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa Board of Investment, I would like to highlight that the government is focused towards clean and green energy for the country. The government is also focused on having indigenous sources and leveraging from natural endowment like coal and thar and hydro resources in the north of Pakistan. In Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, we are pitching several energy projects based on hydel and also solar energy, so that the future is of cleaner, sustainable, eco-friendly energy. This would also reduce the cost of energy and make our countries that we compete with, also Vietnam and Cambodia. Ladies and gentlemen, we are also moving towards economic policy. For which SCCs are being developed, and I am part of the development process of Rashaka in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. And also, while crafting the industrial policy for Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, we were aware of the fact during our consultative session with the industrialists that they are looking for cheaper form of energy. The wheeling that is being offered to our industries in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa also is quite appealing for relocation of industries from Punjab and Sindh, and all those investors who, because of the terrorism in the past, have moved out of KP. I see these energy projects as a stimulus for industrial growth in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. Ladies and gentlemen, clean and green energy is of the future. While we leverage Thar coal, which would become the coal energy capital for Pakistan, we are actually importing supercritical technology so that the carbon emissions are reduced, our environment is catered for. And in the environment impact assessment, the government remains cognizant, and also in the planning commission, healthy debate is happening as we speak around energy conservation and also promoting projects which produce less carbon and efficient energy. Ladies and gentlemen, I am hopeful that the discussion today would be a stimulus for further discussions in future. I would also welcome SDPI to come to Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and make an assessment of the project and potential that we have in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, so that together we can move forward on the journey of industrialization, sustainable industrialization, eco-friendly industrialization, and industry that can promote economic growth, socio-economic development, and can bring Pakistan to the glory that it really needs. Ladies and gentlemen, the government is offering a lot of incentives for industry and also for investment in the energy sector. I have also spoken to GIK for holding a seminar for mini micro turbine producers, and by support of the academia, the government and the think tank, I think we can generate a kind of debate and policy formulation that can bring change. So at the end, again, I would like to thank SDPI and would encourage all questions now or through the chat box for which we can engage. And also, Khyber Pakhtunkhwa Board of Investment welcomes all its investors, friends, think tanks, SDPI to come and explore the potential of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, the land of growing opportunity.
Thank you very much. I do see BOIT's team sitting here, so please do convey our gratitude to Hassan Saab. And we do understand that he has been with us since morning, for which we are very grateful. So making use of Umar Malik Saab's presence here, my colleague, Mr. Ahad Nazir, has again reminded me that there are questions on Twitter. So let's just pick up one, given its importance, and I can pose it to Mr. Umar Malik Saab. The question is that what's your view on the stranded assets cost if there is a liberalized wheeling market in the country? At what level wheeling charges would become acceptable to players like yourself without burdening the exchequer excessively through the annual capacity payments? Maybe Umar Saab, if you'd like to take that question.
Sure. It's a good question. In a lot of back and forth on what is stranded cost, what is acceptable stranded cost, and we feel what the discos came up with, in the earlier part of 2020 after a consultation session amongst themselves and with CPPA, was something close to 15 rupees. Now that's a non-starter. I mean, it doesn't cost you 15 rupees. I mean, if we were to add 15 rupees to any source of power, it would make it uneconomical. So naturally, all the potential players pushed back against it. And NEPRA came back and gave a very reasonable and well thought out number, which is closer to 2 rupees as the cost of stranded power. जिसके अंदर they didn't call it stranded power. This was essentially compensating the distribution companies for their technical losses when it comes to transmission and distribution of this power. Now, if you look at what regional numbers look like, the cost of wheeling in India is anywhere from 2% to 17% of total power cost. And if solar electricity costs you today, 8-9 rupees, you can naturally add something like, maybe 1 or 2 rupees to that, so that the total cost to the consumer is something like, 10 to 12 rupees. That is the only way we will make our industries competitive. If we keep lumping these inefficient costs of inefficiency, costs of bad decisions that have been made in the past onto our industries and our consumers, we will never be competitive regionally. And you will never be able to get rid of this, phenomena which exists in Pakistan, that power should only be set up with government guarantees, with guaranteed returns on equity, with guaranteed return on equity, which are also pegged to US dollar escalations, CPI escalations, etc. I mean, let the private industry play with the private industry. And you facilitate it with what is the natural loss, let's say, to the distribution companies when it comes to technical losses and when it comes to distribution margin, which are both very well established by NEPRA. So, I mean, over here, I think, बाकी जब हम चीजें बुरी देखते हैं या improvements देखते हैं, NEPRA has done a fantastic job of assigning, a value to this as the regulator. And I believe that this is something that the distribution companies should accept. I mean, and as it goes forward, I'm not saying that they should just in the first instance start by opening up wheeling completely for everything. They could do it in a phased manner, let's say a couple of 100 megawatts per disco for the first year to see what impact that has. So net metering ke andar bhi, I mean, this was started off conservative, limiting it to 1 megawatt. And now you've seen, the impact, nothing has broken down like the discos claimed initially, that the system will basically collapse and the grid is not going to be able to accept it and there will be technical difficulties. None of that has actually transpired. So I think that in a similar way, a phased approach to starting wheeling should take place.
Thank you indeed, Omar Saab. The next question which has been posted is around the capital market for green financing, particularly the green financing products. On this, Dr. Sajid, if I can request you maybe to highlight this aspect maybe.
Thank you. I think there has been a discussion on the role of private sector and sustainable financing of green energy transition. So I think one point that will be interesting to see is small investors coming in because right now we have some big investors which are smaller in the numbers. Just to have a larger pool of investors, the role of capital market will be very critical, and particularly on do we have some sort of de-risked with incentivized green financing products, and I think State Bank of Pakistan as a regulator of financial and capital market must look into this sort of mapping of the financial products with key focus on how aligned they are towards green financing, with the key focus on green financing products. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Saab. And if I can also add in this that it's only now, I think since last year, that SECP allowed the crowdfunding rules as well. within which, of course, this was a demand from energy sector as well, so that micro investments in energy sector can be attracted. And I think the financial innovations this year could also attract diaspora into this crowdfunding as well through Roshan Digital Account and other initiatives. So I now, according to the agenda, I now had to present the summary from today's summit, but I do see that we have had a very comprehensive discussion today. So we have slightly gone over time. So I have, I'm actually blown away by the richness of the discussion. I've almost 7 pages of recommendations, which is very good. And they look like very solid recommendations. I am not going to read them out just to save you your evenings here, but just in the interest of formally registering, because this is an online session as well, going over Facebook and others, I think the top 10 recommendations here pertain to areas which include, number 1, improving power evacuation before power capacity addition. Number 2, diverting CPEC investments towards grid infrastructure and improvements. The second set of recommendations talks about removing expensive power from grid. We have had discussion on incentive structure for solutions such as rooftop solar. Then the fifth set of recommendations is with regards to shift from single to multi-buyer model. We've had discussion on building upon the long-term projects for solar and wind in marginalized areas, including Balochistan. The seventh was pathways towards decarbonization, which were discussed in today's discussion. Eighth, there was discussion on, very comprehensive discussion on aligning fiscal response with green recovery, and of course, COVID-19, how COVID-19 provides an opportunity to do that as well. And of course, we had discussion around green financing mechanism, something which we also touched upon during this discussion. Focusing on energy efficiency and conservation measures, as rightly picked up in this session, greening of China-Pakistan economic corridor, and there are some very good sub-recommendations under this heading as well. And then, of course, some further recommendations on clean energy investments. I think some of the recommendations which just came during the Q&As, which also require or worth a mention, this was with regards to frameworks or planning towards reduction of fossil fuel subsidies, redirecting those subsidies towards innovation and clean energy technologies, and how public-private partnerships could help this, and also looking at the energy climate nexus through a gender lens. So I would really like to thank the team which actually has put together this very comprehensive set of recommendations, and my suggestion would be really to put it out online, maybe tonight or tomorrow morning, you know, whenever these are in edited form. So before I invite Ambassador Kakakhel, let me thank this very esteemed panel, Ms. Kushmala Kakakhel, Ms. Sobia Becker, Ms. Farda Malik, Mr. Umar Malik, Dr. Fayaz Chaudhry. Tanveer Saab was with us as well, and including colleagues who have contributed to this discussion through questions and answer, as well as over Twitter and Facebook. Let me now invite Ambassador Shafqat Kakakhel Saab for his closing remarks, please. Sir. Ambassador Kakakhel is Chairperson, Board of Governors, Sustainable Development Policy Institute.
Thank you, Bakar. Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.
Thank you so much, Bakar, for asking me to to speak at the conclusion of the day-long discussion on a subject of great importance for Pakistan and for the international community. I would like to thank SDPI for co-hosting this extremely important discussion, and I would also like to congratulate SDPI colleagues, Hena Aslam and Sajid Amin particularly, for their extremely rich inputs for the discussion. I have tried to listen in to most of the discussions. They almost comprehensively cover each and every aspect of the subject of transition to a clean, green energy. I'd just like to make a few points, but before I speak on the subject of transition to green energy, I'd like to refer to the statement made by my dear friend Malik Amin Aslam Khan, in which he reiterated the current government's resolve to stop forever the use or import of coal from outside. I hope that on a reconsideration of all the aspects of the use of coal for generating power, the government will have the courage to completely stop the use of coal for power generation. Even in Hena Aslam's presentation, where she gave the positive and negative aspects, she did not mention the very, very profound adverse health impacts of the use of coal, whether local or imported. So I'd like this meeting on transition to clean energy to somewhere mention the view of the participants that Pakistan needs to make a complete clean break. There was no need to introduce coal in our energy mix. There was absolutely no justification, and whenever civil societies protested, they were ignored. But let that be a closed chapter, I hope. As I mentioned, a very rich and discussion has covered almost all the aspects, but I'd just like to reiterate once again why this transition to clean energy is important. It has the twin objectives of providing clean energy and reducing Pakistan's considerable energy bill, but it also enables Pakistan to make a solid contribution to the efforts of the international community to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, which are the major driver of the multifaceted challenge or threat of climate change. I'd also like to mention that one, as I see, having traveled to various remote areas of Pakistan, that the installation of green and clean energy is particularly useful in the case of remotely situated regions, where it is very, very expensive as well as logistically difficult to extend the grid. So you can provide those 20-25 million Pakistanis, as well as another 25 million in the rural areas. We have almost 50, maybe more, million Pakistanis that even today in 2021 are denied the benefits of electricity. So that is a particularly attractive aspect of the transition to green energy. As far as the recommendations are concerned, my first recommendation would be that there has to be at the policy level coherence and integration. Climate change, this policy of clean energy, we have a very forward-looking policy. There were some initial mistakes, such as the lack of clarity about the 2006 policy on renewable energy, but that was clarified later on. What we need is a coherence among the defining strategies, our climate change policy, which I believe is being revised, our water resource policy, our food security policy, and our clean energy policy. There has to be a cross-sectoral coherence. Otherwise, you will have one branch of the government doing one thing and another branch of the government doing something else. So the need for this integration. Of course, we are now 4 or 5 months away from Glasgow. So the clean energy policy must be reflected in the revised NDC, the nationally determined contribution of Pakistan, where you present an overall profile of the country's economy and its efforts to achieve sustainable development. This policy must find an appropriate reflection so that the international community takes cognizance, particularly the targets. Each time I read about the 30% target of clean energy and 30% of hydro, which is also clean, 60% in our energy mix by 2030, I get worried because these are highly ambitious targets. But I hope that it would be somehow, it would be possible to achieve these highly ambitious targets. I'd like, while on the subject, and probably to make my job easier, refer to the remarkable study that was undertaken by the International Renewable Energy Agency in collaboration with our Alternative Energy Development Board in 2018, I think. And the report, a comprehensive report, was prepared in April 2018. It deals with each and every renewable energy source and overall gives the good news that Pakistan has ample opportunities of developing renewable energy, and there are also recommendations. I've mentioned just a few of those recommendations. The first recommendation is that the government must develop and implement an integrated energy plan with the participation of representatives of stakeholders and civil society. They must work with the government in all stages, both for efficiency and legitimacy. The government should fix or set well-defined, realistic, and time-bound targets in order overall targets as well as individual targets. So much for the entire spectrum of clean energy, and so much for wind, so much for solar, so much for this. And it should also consider what is known as renewable energy zoning. And of course, the question of procurement. I was particularly happy that the new policy provides for competitive bidding. Our next door neighbor, India, has successfully tried that. And I also welcome the fact that the government has already signed an agreement with the World Bank, which has agreed to undertake the task of conducting the international bids. I hope I can hear very soon the date for the first bidding, where the government only decides, says, we want so much energy, so many megawatts of solar or wind energy, and then calls upon the international investors to come up with their bids. And I understand the previous energy minister kept on saying cost will be an extremely important consideration. The government should also develop a comprehensive distributed power generation plan. And I would like to again return to the topic of rural electrification, so that the 50 million that I mentioned are provided with electricity. And the other topic which I'm surprised I did not hear is the question of local manufacture of equipment used in renewable energy. One of the reasons why in India now, the cost of renewable energy, both solar and wind, is much, much less than coal. The locally produced coal is that they produce most of the equipment used. Their panels are not great, but that's what India does. They start with whatever they can manufacture and then try to improve the quality. So towards the end, I think I've spoken for too long and add it to Waqar's list of 10 or 12 recommendations. But I'd like once again to congratulate SDPI for the marvelous discussion. I was happy to see from Hena Aslam's presentation on the details of the program that is of which this summit was a part. There is a tremendous spectrum of activities which are aimed at enlisting support and awareness of the value and importance of renewable energy. So I now will happily release you all from the agony of listening to more and more, and wish you a nice evening. And once again, thank you so much for this opportunity of sharing my thoughts with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Shafkat Kakakhil Saab. And I think I must add here that, yes, your addition to the list of recommendations is certainly welcome. And some of these are certainly very important, including the health benefits and costed gains from moving away from coal. And of course, paying attention to local manufacturing of RE tech and how this way the cost of local technology solutions could go down. And of course, other very pertinent ideas which you mentioned, and certainly agreed with the point that clean energy policy should be presented in the revised NDC as well. Very, very important point. And I must thank you as well as Chairperson, Board of Governors of STPI. You continue to provide strategic guidance to us on a subject which is very close to your heart. So thank you for taking time out and really presenting some very articulate thoughts over here. Let me now give it for a formal closing, a vote of thanks, and including, of course, the way forward on where do we basically go from here, to Dr. Hina Aslam, who has, of course, led this entire proceeding from the very front. So I must thank you, Dr. Saba. You deserve a lot of congratulations here. And I think I'll hand it over to you for a formal closing. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Waqar. Just to begin with, I would like to thank you. I would like to extend my gratitude to Ambassador Shafkat Kakakhil Saab for the closing remarks, for this very insightful discussion, and for making this, marking this event successful at the end of today. Just to recap, the activity marks the last meeting, as we call it, a summit, because we plan to not only launch the research products that we have produced out of this clean energy transition project of Pakistan, but also based on the recommendations that we have proposed in our executive summary, and also as a part of this project, we wanted to have a panel discussion on the prospects, and that's where we have actually gained what we intended to, is the addition of all those recommendations that we probably would have missed out in the previous meetings, and we could not have included, especially the last, where we could account, especially the costs related to the health of the coal, as rightly pointed out, is very, very pertinent. And we are really grateful for this useful suggestion. All the rest of the compiled recommendations that Dr. Waqar has in his hand is apparently, shows that how the discussions have led to very concrete recommendations that could be added on into our draft and could be forwarded and disseminated to all the relevant stakeholders for priority actions. And when we do that, these priority recommendations will be not only disseminated, but will be made publicly available online, just to have a comment, more suggestions, more inputs, and we keep it dynamic. As we keep these documents dynamic as well, there's lots been going on in the energy and power sector every day that we had to, even during the process of making these documents, we had gone through the 2 IG sets that came along our way, and we had to recalculate some of our findings and some of the results. So that's how challenging it is actually to stay in this, to work in this field, that it keeps on having, bringing in its more challenges, but yet opportunities, where we have talked about the really good reforms. We have identified the green financing strategies that could be aligned to meet our NDCs, to meet the climate agenda, and also how the each and every potential actor and the stakeholder could play its role in making this clean energy transition in Pakistan in a smoother and a transparent way. The identified challenges are there, but we are really hopeful that with the onset of the policy that we have in hand right now with ARE 2019, we have just recently been have in our hand is the National Electricity Policy 2021 as well, electrical vehicle policy, to look at all the sectors that needs decarbonization, including transport, industry, power, and energy efficiency and appliances. So that's what we have talked about, and that's what I would like to wrap up this discussion for today. I'm very, very thankful to all the panelists who took out their time and joined us in person as well as online. And it's been a very, very nice event for all of us as well, because this is, I think, the only second hybrid meeting. The first hybrid meeting we have conducted on this level, but we have had one hybrid in Peshawar, the public-private dialogue. So that was another, I think, component that I could see as being successful and an impactful thing for us. And we hope to continue to have this continued engagement. So like I said, like these documents and these policy recommendations stay dynamic, and we keep on adding to those as we go along. We're not just ending up this project and then that's it. We are continued, and based on our on the project outcomes, we have also formulated this clean energy transition network that that actually collects all the people in their capacities to complement and to support this transition. And we have actually 3 subgroups as well, out of which we will be showing in the in one of a video by our executive director, Dr. Abid. There will be a formal way, a form where people can register and become part of it. And we are going to have, of course, a proper action plan, a proper the priority areas and targets that what we are going to achieve through those networks, and in what capacity can everyone complement in this regard. So that's all from me today. Thank you so much, Dr. Bakar, for joining in at the end and in person, despite your busy schedule. Dr. Sajid, for continuous support in this project, and also with our continued on the green recovery, that we'll have several activities coming up in the future on that. My team, Abdullah, Ahad, Ubaid, and the advocacy IT team, all the social media team. I think this event would not have been possible without their support. So we have been working day and night for the last 3 weeks to make it happen. And I'm so happy that we actually made it. So thank you so much. Thank you. And I'll just request the IT team to play the Dr. Abid's message, and we can call it a day. Thank you.
To clean energy requires collective efforts of government, of academia, of think tanks, and of individual citizens. And in order to promote this collectivity, and in order to promote this collaboration, Sustainable Development Policy Institute has initiated a network called Clean Energy Transition Network. If you are interested in promoting clean energy, if you are interested in supporting this transition towards clean energy, then please join us. We have 3 subgroups. The first group is Renewable Energy Working Group. The second subgroup is Corporate Sustainability Group. And the third subgroup is Natural Capital Impact Network. I look forward to seek your support, and I look forward to work in collaboration with you.